Good evening, Razorback fans. Welcome into episode 2 of Hawgs on the Hill podcast, your go-to podcast for an in-depth dive into all things Arkansas Razorbacks. Join us as we dissect the victories, analyze the plays, and revel in the spirit of the Hogs. Episode 2 is brought to you by Homefield. Step into the legacy of collegiate style with Homefield's premium vintage apparel. Embrace the spirit of your alma mater or your favorite team with our meticulously crafted, comfortable, and stylish collection. Elevate your game day attire and celebrate the rich history of college sports. Homefield, where tradition meets comfort in every stitch, and you can get your very own Homefield apparel using Variety Sports in all caps with 15% off thanks to Variety Sports Network. And as you notice, we are joined by our fabulous guest host, David from Hoops Southbound. He's going to join us today and talk Arkansas basketball, transfer portal, recruits, all that fun stuff. If you haven't checked out his channel, go check it out. He breaks all this down for not only Arkansas, but all the SEC schools, including our two newcomers, are Texas and Oklahoma. So we'll jump in today with this. As you know, it's been a crazy portal season ever since Coach Cal's been hired, and that's only been maybe a month if we're stretching it out there. It's been an insane few weeks, especially with that whole situation, and then all the transfers and recruits that he's been able to kind of not necessarily poach, but convince to follow him from formerly Kentucky to here at Arkansas. And so initial thoughts there, if they haven't tuned into your show, David, what's your thoughts on, how this roster has been constructed so far?
Yeah, so my initial thoughts on what Cal has put together here so far is you have a group of very talented freshmen, which is very much his MO. But the thing that I've really highlighted so far is that since 24/7 and On3 started ranking transfer portal prospects in the portal, Coach Cal has never brought in a top 10 or top 15 transfer. He's brought in 2 so far in this class alone for Arkansas in his first offseason. So that's wild. And those 2 names are Jonas Aidoo and Johnell Davis, or Nelly Davis, depending. I've heard that's what he likes to be called, through the social media world. But 2 very high prospect players, top 10 on 3, top 15 on 24/7, and 2 experienced players who come from winning programs that you can have lead your team. And when we've talked about on my show, the structure of teams that tend to do well in March, one of the criteria you're looking for is upperclassmen being 2 out of your 3 leading scorers. And so I think that if Johnell Davis and Jonas Aidoo are those 2 guys, that's a great place to get started, building a foundation and a core of your team around those 2 guys. And you've inserted plenty of talent from what is looking to be a very strong freshman class, not only for Arkansas, but collectively. The NBA is very excited about this group of freshmen. So to bring in a couple of guys from the top 35, that's some high level talent that Arkansas is bringing in the freshman class as well.
Yeah, that's very true. It's been an interesting construction, and there's still a few guys out there that they're visiting, and one of those names is DJ Wagner. That would be another big get if that does solidify with him coming to visit this weekend. It's for the most part, Cal, if they've visited, they haven't left campus without committing. And the one exception to that is Brandon Garrison, that from Oklahoma State, that ended up going to Kentucky. But I think that's an exception just because I feel like Cal got his man with Adou, and kind of Brandon Garrison wasn't necessarily a backup option, but it was another option in case maybe that didn't go the way he thought it would. And so I think you have a good chance if DJ Wagner does get on campus, and he is this weekend with him, having that familiarity with Cal. How big of a addition would that be, along with we already talked about Adou and Nelly Davis. How big would it also bring on a guy like DJ Wagner that has that familiarity with Cal, and add him to this already talented roster?
Yeah, so DJ Wagner was a player I was super excited about coming into this freshman class for the SEC this season to Kentucky. And it was a little bit of a disappointment, but he's still a darn good player. Now has a year of college basketball under his belt. He's looking like possibly he might end up playing for a coach he's played for if things go according to plan this weekend on the visit for him in Fayetteville. DJ Wagner is a very aggressive guard with a lot of potential. And honestly, I think he shoots the 3 better than what he shot last season. And I've seen his high school tape, and his high school tape certainly suggests that. I think he just had a rough go of it his first year in the SEC. Now, honestly, a lot of Hog fans right now are talking about Boogie Flam being your starting point guard. I don't have a problem with that. I don't think that's anything wrong with that, but you need to also understand Boogie Flam is not a true point. And, neither is really DJ Wagner, but he played a lot of points at Kentucky. So you have the opportunity, if you bring DJ Wagner in, to have a guy who could run the 1, and then you could slide Boogie Fland over to the 2, or vice versa. You can work it any way that you want, where Boogie Fland is your backup point guard and you're starting 2, and then you have Johnell Davis out there. Any combination you can think of in your backcourt. So that does open up some versatility in your backcourt. And I think a true point guard is what Arkansas has kind of been missing as an element in their backcourt so far. So bringing a guy like DJ Wagner, who's had a year of experience playing point, would certainly be a good add for the backcourt for the Razorbacks. What I would like to see more than anything else now for Coach Cal attacking the portal is try to bring in guys who are 3-and-D minded and have experience. Those would be the 2 criteria I'm looking for, and possibly someone who is dominant defensively from the 4 position. Like that would be the criteria I'd be looking for right now in the portal if I was Coach Cal.
Seth, your thoughts on potential of DJ Wagner being added to this roster with him coming for a visit this weekend?
Well, you guys kind of hit the nail on the head already, just as far as the added depth at the guard position, which I think we talked about it in some previous shows. That's kind of the one area that I feel like we're going to need a little bit more depth at than we currently have. Whether he plays point, whether he plays kind of a smaller shooting type guard, whatever you really want to play him at, I think you'll have the opportunity to have him be successful with all the other scores that are around the court. You're going to be able to stretch a little bit more than maybe they were able to at Kentucky last year. Maybe, I don't know. They had a lot of shooters on that team. So
I bet to say they stretched the floor pretty well at Kentucky last season. Defense was the problem for the Wildcats.
Yeah, that's very true. But maybe he'll have a little bit more opportunity to get his own while the floor is also stretched. So I don't know. Find a little bit better balance for him than he had last year. Jury's all out on that, depending on if he even comes or not. But I still think Boogie Fland is going to have a dramatic impact on this team. Year one, he's that level of a player. So it's going to be interesting to see the balance that this team has when it comes to the roster overall. There's, obviously a lot of things going on around the media right now on how many players we're going to have overall. So I think that'll also have a key indication on, kind of who fits in where, who kind of fills those role player spots, who fills those starting role spots. And then to David's point, I think we need a 1 or 2 more guys that are, very, very defensive, high energy, kind of gritty type players. They can shoot the 3 even better. But I agree. I think that's where we need to maybe have another guy or 2 just to have a body out there. If you need somebody to go throw a couple of hard fouls on someone, throw them in the game, if you will. But overall, it's been a fun ride to see where this roster has been shaping out.
Well, what's interesting to me is that you're bringing in a couple of guys from Kentucky from last season. I know that the vibe and the joke has been like, this is just Kentucky's roster from last year. Davis and Adou obviously weren't playing there, but I'm sorry, I got a cough like all of a sudden. But what I was saying was, hold on one second, guys. Sorry about that. I was going to close that mic up there, but that was the worst defensive rating we'd ever seen for a Calipari team in the history of KenPom. And that goes back all the way to him coming back to college basketball after he got done coaching in the NBA level. So you would definitely like to see improved defense. I think that's a huge priority for Arkansas coming to this point. Ooh, sorry about that.
You're good, man.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, let's just quickly recap some of these guys that we're talking about here that brought over. So one of Arkansas's first commit after the announcement of Coach Cal bringing over is you bring it over Big Z, Zvonimir Ivisic, and he's a guy that you didn't get to see a lot of last year. As he didn't get cleared to play till over halfway through the season for Kentucky, and he showed a lot of spark last year. He's a big, a big anchor piece that you can have in there, but can also stretch the floor and step out and shoot the 3 as well. I'm interested to see what kind of development we have over a full off season with Coach Cal and what he brings in kind of a year 2 under Cal, and what kind of piece he could be in the SEC as a big.
Yeah, it's definitely, you've wanted to see more out of Z. Kentucky was big on him. They definitely needed another big man last year. Obviously, he didn't get the opportunity to play a full season. and getting adjusted to the college game last year. That's something that hopefully here in year 2, he gets adjusted to the game and he can bring a lot to the table because he's a player. He can play the 4, he can play the 5. He's got that level of versatility, and his ability to shoot and pass makes him just an extremely dangerous player out of that 4 spot. So he can be somebody with a very high ceiling for the Razorbacks next season.
Emphasis on the high there. That kid's enormous.
Oh, he's huge. He is absolutely huge. And my favorite thing that happened last year at Kentucky was when he hung on the rim there at his first college game because he was playing out of his mind for the few minutes that he got. And he in the post-game conference, press conference, he said, "Oh yeah, I forgot you can't do that in the United States." I was like, cracked me up. I was like, "This kid's awesome. I dig it."
That is hilarious. And then so as you jump over, the next guy to talk about that's coming over from that Kentucky roster is Adou Thiero. He's a guy that he left before Coach Cal even announced he was leaving. He was a guy that, may have already kind of known that Cal was maybe going to head out the door. It was rumored that he was going to visit Pitt, a few other schools. But it's like we talked about before the show, Coach Cal got him on campus and he didn't leave. He committed Arkansas. He's another guy that has an enormous amount of talent that I think, they're talking like, with the development that he could have, he could turn himself into a potentially very high first round pick next year in the NBA. So, we see these stats here for his season at Kentucky. What kind of development out of him and how big of a piece could he be as we, see him in that next step of the development as well?
So the thing with Adou Thiero is he was recruited out of high school as a guard. And he's continued to grow and get bigger in every direction, adding muscle mass, getting taller. His body has continued to grow. So now he's a guard in a forward's body. And it's a strange set of skills that you have here. So you could have somebody who can potentially play anywhere in your front court, honestly. And when I mean literally anywhere, this guy during Kentucky's game last season against Kansas during the Champions Classic, Kentucky didn't have Aaron Bradshaw or Trey Mitchell in that game. They had no 5. And obviously, as we were just talking about, Big Z wasn't available. They had no one to play the 5 against Hunter Dickinson. And this kid is so athletic and just big enough to where he was able to play defensively and hold his own against Kansas's front court. So if he continues to develop and gets larger, gets faster, gets stronger, and maintains those guard skills, he's got a very high ceiling. That's why everyone's talking so big on him as a upperclassman, high draft pick for next season. So that is in his potential if he continues to develop the way that he was. And then we've all, I guess, seen the picture. If you follow college basketball in general, he went from this very scrawny kid his first year to just having tons of muscle on him. And he just hits the gym. He lives in the gym. He's one of those kind of players. So he's a kid who cares about his development and sticks to his training plan quite a bit. And he's very serious about developing himself to the next level. I like Adou Thiero a lot. If Maddie was on this show right now, which you guys know my co-host, she loves Adou Thiero. So he's a very high ceiling player. Like I said, Arkansas has 2 pieces that they've got potentially for a 4, playing that power forward position, are 2 guys that have a very, very high ceiling for them. And Caleb, you were talking about just a minute ago, when he left Kentucky, yeah, you're probably right. I don't want to confirm rumors or anything like that because I don't know exactly what went down, but we do know that Cal was looking at jobs back in February. And so, like, seeing Adou Thiero put his name in the portal and then coming back to Cal is not the biggest shock in the world. Obviously, if you know your coach is leaving, you might be leaving a little bit faster than everybody else anticipated.
I was about to say, and I think that shows something that, there's not many coaches out there that is going to have, I don't want to call it a following, but that type of repertoire where, he leaves his previous school and all of his, not all, but a lot of his former players follow him to his new school. All of his recruits flip to follow him to that new school. I think that just tells you what kind of development and what that says about Coach Cal himself on, these players want to play for him, be developed by him because they know ultimately he's one of the biggest reasons a lot of players from Kentucky have gotten to the NBA is that development effect that Cal has on these guys.
Well, he can definitely, he has those resources. He's got guys in the past he's been able to develop. Kenny Payne was a big part of that, who Arkansas's got on the coaching staff now. So like, yes, high profile talent is going to follow John Calipari because he's got a resume about a mile long that sits here and says, I can get you to the league, draft pick or not. Like, ask Oscar Tshiebwe where he's playing right now. I mean, he wasn't a draft pick and he's on the Indiana Pacers roster somewhere. So like, yeah, he's a coach who's got that resume. So players are going to always want to play for him. And if they're interested in trying to get to that next step, he's somewhere on their radar.
Yeah, that's very true. Next guy we're going to talk about is, we just mentioned one of those experienced guards that Arkansas managed to land, easily one of the top players in the transfer portal that, you mentioned it on your show, David, where if you saw the NIL number that was rumored for this guy north of $1 million, I mean, there's a reason why. He came in and he was a big piece for that FAU team the previous 2 seasons in their tournament runs they had. Can bring a been there, done that mindset to this Arkansas team that's going to be young and very new as far as everybody playing together. And he can help these guys understand what it takes to make it to the tournament, make that run. And just like you said, David, you look at some of these teams that have made those deep runs, what do they consist of? Experienced players that have been there and done that, along with some young, very talented, younger classmen as well.
Yeah, and I mean, he's got a Final Four run under his belt, and he made it to the round of 32 last year where they were knocked out by a 1 seed in their second game. So, I mean, it's everybody's got a case of the sniffles. It must be the pollen going around in Northwest Arkansas right now. But, yeah, it's a high potential there. Now, what excites me, and buckle up, Razorback fans, because like I think we've all heard this before, but we're all excited about it anytime someone mentions it. This kid can shoot. And how long have we needed 3-point shooting at Arkansas? He shot 48.3% from the field, 41.4% from 3, and he's even better in the corners. He was 50-50 in the corners. So excellent 3-point shooter, and he's got the ability to be a bit of a combo guard as well. So if he needs to handle the ball, he can do that. But he also plays extremely well off the ball or at the 2 position to be a primary handler as a 2. It doesn't really matter. You can mix him in a lot of different ways, but he's a very effective shooting guard and someone that anybody would be excited to have on their team because that shooting ability is fantastic. And if you shoot 40% from 3, I want you on my team.
Oh, 100%.
Crazy numbers.
The
first thing.
Oh, good. Sorry about that, Seth. Oh, I was going to say, just considering the fact, if you shoot 40% from 3, and I was talking about this when I was analyzing Kentucky's roster that they've put together. If you shoot 40% from 3, that's more effective than shooting 50% from 2 because your points per possession goes up to 1.2. Alabama's points per possession last season, which was the most efficient offense in the country, was 1.23. So if you have a player like Johnell Davis, you up your points per possession, and it makes you a more effective offense instantly. And if you can get guys around him who are also excellent offensive contributors like Boogie Fland and Carter Knox and Billy Richmond, who is a very good attacker of the rim and can drive the basketball and open up and floor spacing for very proficient 2s, you can start pushing into those upper 1.2s to 1.21, 1.22, which those sound like minor things. But when you start adding those up over your course of possessions per game, you're talking about an offense that scores 85 points, which would be top 5 in the SEC.
Yeah, and that's hard to beat. I think the last time we've had a shooter that's even close to 40% from 3 was Isaiah Joe, and I don't think he shot that in college. I think he shot that in the NBA.
I think you're right.
But I mean, he was close to that if I recall. But that's been 6-7 years.
Yeah, that was Muss's first season back in 2019, 2020.
It was his first season. Okay, yeah. So 5 years then, but. It seems like longer than that for some reason to me, but we just haven't had a true shooter. I don't believe in that long. You've had some guys that have been close, but nothing to that level. So that is definitely an exciting factor and exciting statistic.
I was about to say, when you talk about that level, there's really one guy that comes to mind for me, and that's way back before that is Rodney Clark, a guy that shot a high clip.
Way on back in the day, man. I was a kid.
I think
no kidding
back there, but
and then finally to wrap up the transfers here, you've got Jonas Aidoo, a big key piece for that Tennessee squad last year that made their run, and it's just like we said, you've got those not necessarily young guys, but younger guys with Thiero and Big Z that come in that can develop a little bit and have a huge upside. But then you bring in Johnell Davis and Jonas Aidoo, two guys that are upperclassmen, very experienced, have been around a little bit. And he's just going to be able to bring an inside dominant presence that I think over the past few seasons Arkansas lacked. You had a handful of guys that would have great games from time to time, but to have a guy come in like Jonas Aidoo that can bring that presence on a more consistent level, I think could be big for this team.
Well, first off, with Jonas Aidoo, both Evan Mia and On Three have him in the top 10 transfer portal gets for this class, and he was second team All SEC last season. He's been a player that's gotten linearly better every year, and you can watch the stat sheet and just see year by year how much better that he's gotten. Right now, though, I will say, like, if you're outside Arkansas, I mean, if you're in Arkansas, you're excited right now, and you're looking at the stats and everything else and going, yeah, that's the dude I want. Hey, that's the second best center in the transfer portal. I absolutely want Jonas Aidoo. For fans who are outside the fan base right now, they're talking a lot. But the reason they're talking is if there's just sour taste in everybody's mouth from what happened in that second weekend of the NCAA tournament where they faced Creighton and Purdue. Now, I would like to remind everybody who's in the front court for Creighton and Purdue. You got Ryan Kalkbrenner and Zach Edey, who are both looking to be NBA draft picks this year. So it's not like he was just getting beat by nobodies out there on the basketball court. Jonas Aidoo is a very good player, and he had a dominant February. He had a fantastic season, and he kept, honestly, Tennessee's offense churning at times when Dalton Knecht was not out there. So you are not on his best game offensively. So Jonas Aidoo is a guy that you can work with, build up, and he could be a force in your front court. And let's not forget the resume. Again, we've talked about the resume on Coach Cal. DeMarcus Cousins, Anthony Davis, Oscar Tshiebwe. I really feel like Coach Cal, we're talking about guys being developed in the draft picks. He can possibly get Jonas Aidoo to be a late second round pick or even a very, very high profile, unsigned free agent coming into the draft next year. I think that's for real a possibility with Jonas Aidoo. He's that talented and someone that we've just seen progressively get better.
I think one of the big things I'm excited about having him and Big Z on the same team is, and you throw Adou Thiero in there as well, is you've got a lot of potential to kind of get back to a similar style of basketball like we had in might have been Muss's first or second year when we had Justin Smith and Jalen Williams was a freshman, had an Elite Eight run that year. You had kind of the two big guys down low on the court at the same time quite often with Jay Will and Justin Smith, and they did a lot of work down low. Being able to pass back and forth to each other. Obviously, Jalen was drawing a lot of charges, but they did a lot of fun things. Just those two guys alone, you had a lot of other talent on that team as well. But those two bigs kind of down low, they did a lot of work to each other. And I think you could have that similar type of chemistry matchup between a Jonas Aidoo and a Big Z, where he can kind of almost run the pick and roll as the big guy up top if you need to and have him pass the ball out of it. So there's a lot of weird flexibility that I think just having a couple of these talented bigs on the team, it's going to be a little bit different than what we've seen the last few years for Arkansas basketball.
Well, if you're talking about you're running Thiero at the 4, you have someone who's extremely athletic who can drive the basketball. And if he develops his three-point shooting, Thiero can even space the floor further to where you get Jonas Aidoo in some one-on-one situations. And there aren't going to be too many centers in the SEC next season that are going to be on the same caliber as Jonas Aidoo. So that's a big possibility. And then with Big Z, he may not be as athletic as Thiero, but if Big Z is playing the 4, you're talking about someone who's got some three-point shooting ability to even stretch that floor further. Someone's got to guard him. And otherwise, if he's shooting, 30, 32, 33% from 3 from the 4 position, someone's got to guard that kid. And that opens up the paint again for easy 2s on the inside, especially in a game where you might be going up against a weaker center. That could be a huge night for Jonas Aidoo.
And plus, you think about it, in the few games that Big Z had for Kentucky last year, he's shown that he has fantastic court vision and passing ability. So, like you said, you get him stretch the floor too. He has that ability to make those passes as well. So I think that's another element that you can think about whenever him being a stretch kind of 4 guy. That if you flash him out, they have to guard him with a chance of that 3 ball, but also then watch out. He may whip a pass in there that, would be almost like something that you'd see from a guard.
Yeah, certainly so. And like I said, you're exactly right. You watch that tape back. Yeah, he's not afraid to throw that thing around and try to find some passes. You develop it and you cut down on turnovers, which wasn't a huge deal at Kentucky. But I will say one thing that Kentucky was very good at last season was their assist to turnover ratio. So it can be very encouraging if you have a 4 who's got the ability to facilitate, and he'd be a great addition to this team. Let's see if Cal keeps kind of the same mentality he kept on offense or had last year with his offense, because not having John Welch is going to be very different for Kentucky for John Calipari versus his Kentucky team last season. It's still getting used to calling John Calipari the head coach at Arkansas, even though it's been roughly a month now.
Yeah, that's true. And then finally, as we kind of wrap up these guys here, we've got the recruits. We kind of hit on these, but you've got Boogie Fland, Carter Knox, Billy Richmond, 3 guys that, decommitted from Kentucky as soon as Coach Cal left. And, the assumption, which it seemed to be right for all 3 of these guys, was that they would follow him here to Arkansas. But, as you break down these guys, you look at Boogie Fland, great combo guard that has the ability to shoot, but also has that ability to slash and attack to the rim, is a bigger type point guard that, could be helpful here. And then you got Carter Knox, like we said, him and Billy Richmond, 2 guys that, that guard shooting forward type of player, depending on, their development. Like we said, it's a similar situation to Adou Thiero. These kids could potentially still grow once they get to campus as well. So that could change too. So between all 3 of these guys, I think the potential for this roster is very high. And, I think these guys have a chance to all contribute a lot of minutes with, that's we've seen, that's Cal's MO. You bring in these super talented freshmen and they get a ton of playing time.
Yeah, and I mean, Boogie Fland, microwave ability to get hot. Just a guy who can shoot it anywhere. He's not afraid to shoot it anywhere. Just a fantastic guard that you want on your team. What a lot of people aren't talking about is this defensive ability. He's also one of those guys who are looking to make a highlight on defense, get a steal, get a deflection, whatever, and try to get in transition and get an easy bucket. He's a player that likes to do that, and he's got that ability. Carter Knox is also got some shooting ability out there on the wing, which is something pretty exciting for Arkansas fans to have somebody who can shoot on the 3. Great player, very good athlete. He's got some work to do with defensively. He's not the world's greatest defender. He lacks the fundamentals. He's got great physical size for defense, but he needs to work on some fundamentals, such as the split work on defense. And that would be the big area I'd like to see Carter Knox grow this season. And then finally, Billy Richmond. If you liked Ricky Council, I'm telling you now, you're going to like Billy Richmond if he sees plenty of time on the floor. He's super athletic. And like I said, every time I see a picture of this kid, he just looks so darn skinny, but that's not really the case. He's very, very strong. He's very, very athletic, and he's a human highlight reel waiting to happen. He's an exciting player. So, this is a very young version of Ricky Council who is super talented. You wish that he had some more shooting ability, but he's a driver and one that can definitely get to the hole. So he's got some talent. He can shoot it a little bit outside, but I don't think he's going to light it up much, like some of these other guys will. But Billy Richmond gives you some more versatility there on your roster as well, because he is an excellent driver of the basketball.
I haven't seen a lot of his tape, but I've heard his first step is like wicked quick. Yeah, quicker than most. And he's got a lot of ability to, if you open up your hips, he'll blow right by you.
Yeah, he's explosive. He's fun to watch. I mean, we're all gonna love watching him if he gets in the open court with the basketball in his hand, like with no one guarding him between the hole and transition. Oh, that'll be fun. I remember those ridiculous great finishes with Ricky Council. Billy Richmond can do some of that. He's gonna be fun to watch.
I was about to say Sports Center top 10 heads up. There you go.
It's gonna be a blast.
And so, another thing that, we wanted to hit on, David mentioned it earlier, and the article came out a few hours ago, where Coach Cal sat down on the Ways to Win podcast that's hosted by former Oregon State head coach Craig Robinson this week. And, Cal said, thinking about how college basketball is, the landscape nowadays with transfer portal being big, NIL being big, they're saying that it seems like he might be switching his, philosophy. And I think you even said it on your show, David. Before this year at Arkansas, he didn't really, or wasn't really active in the transfer portal. He rather would go out and get those high level recruits instead of trying to go out and hit the transfer portal and get some experienced, highly talented players. Well, now you're seeing that in, these transfers high level that he's brought in, and talking about assembling a roster. Coach Cal on this podcast said, "You may think I'm crazy, but I told my staff I only want to have 8 or 9 guys on his roster." And his point behind that is he said, they're going to be leaving anyway, talking about whether they're a one and done or, somebody that maybe is a high level recruit and doesn't get as much playing time as kind of they thought. And it's like, well, I'm going to go somewhere else. Well, Coach Cal is saying they're leaving anyway. Why would I develop a kid for somebody else? Why would I do that? And that's some very interesting statements that you think about as we're building this roster. We've got 7 players right now. So if you're thinking about the 8 to 9 guys, you've got maybe 1 to 2 more guys that Cal's looking to add here before that's his quote unquote full roster.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? So once upon a time, you used to fill your roster up with as many, young, talented players you could. Some of them would go to the NBA, and the rest you would try to develop, and you would try to keep bringing in talent as much as possible. And here we are in the world of modern basketball now, modern college basketball, I should say. This is side effects from things like NIL, the transfer portal, and the way that college basketball is designed now. Not too many coaches, honestly, are going to run a rotation anymore that's past 8 or 9 guys. They just aren't. And for most coaches, I hear what Cal's saying, and I understand where he's coming from. For most coaches are thinking closer and closer to moving in this direction. And a lot of it is because they have limited resources in NIL, especially in smaller schools. And then they also see that they can give more money to the players they want to try to convince to stick around, or players that, they can make sure they're happy and taken care of because they're not going to run that many deep anyway. So this is becoming more and more common. Matter of fact, if you don't believe me, go listen to Matt Norlander and Gary Parrish on Eye on College Basketball. They were talking about this exact same subject earlier this week, that this is just a direction that a lot of coaches are starting to think about going in. Cal's being a little bit more vocal about it, and talking about the situation at hand. I don't hate it. Obviously, before we started this show, guys, we were talking about the one concern we have with it. But I would not mind a roster of 10. Like, that would not bug me, even as a Razorback fan. Like, 10 guys to me, who were the 10 Eric Musselman were running last year? And I'm not trying to even if you don't want to talk about last year's team, talk about 2 years ago. Who were the 10 guys Eric Musselman was running on that team? Because I bet you could get to about 8 and then start going, I don't know who the minutes leaders are for 9 and 10, because no one had a clue. No one would have a clue because coaches would continue to cut their rosters over time. So that's just kind of the direction what it was. And even coaches like Eric Musselman, when guys got injured or stuff like that, he would either be forced to take someone out or just continue to cut the rotation even further. And I don't think there's anything surprising about this, in my humble opinion.
I think it's going to be sorry, Caleb. I think it's going to be kind of the new MO until there's some different structure on the way NIL packages have to be put together. 4 or 5 years down the road, this may look different, and we might get back to having more players on individual teams. But whenever you're trying to stretch however many millions of dollars or whatever it is of an NIL budget that you've got across as many good players as possible, if you have to cut the number of players that you go after so you can have higher caliber of players, I think that's kind of what we're seeing here potentially. And it's definitely not a bad strategy, especially in the fact that most of these coaches only play 8 or 9 guys anyways. So focus on those 8 or 9 guys from a financial standpoint, because that's the way of the world nowadays. And just, let the chips fall where they may after that. Hopefully you don't have the injury bug bite you really bad, and you can have a pretty good rotation of those 8 or 9 guys.
And that's the chief concern that we were talking about before the show. Injury. Like, who are you going to go run next? My big concern, which I didn't address, was just the way that John Calipari constructs rosters. If he's going to cut it short, this is going to start scaring me at some point. There's one area that I stay critical on Cal, and look, I'm amongst friends. I'm talking to other Razorback people right now. Just honest to God, the thing I kept talking about with Kentucky over the last couple of years was you cannot become freshman dependent, because if you want to go look at the box sheet for that Oakland game, tell me who played well and tell me who didn't play well. And I'm going to give you a hint. The two best players in that Oakland game were Trey Mitchell and Antonio Reeves. The freshmen did not play great. Now, oftentimes good freshmen can win basketball games. They can get through, but they're not going to lead you to a Final Four. 2012 is a rarity instead of a normality. So, and honestly, if you're going to cut your roster short, please stay active in the transfer portal. That would be my one ask for John Calipari. Please keep bringing in guys who are experienced, like Johnell Davis and Jonas Aidoo and Adou Thiero, and even DJ Wagner, if he were to come to Arkansas, at least has a year of college basketball under his belt. But I would want some upperclassmen mixed in with these freshmen. That would be my number one goal. Like, if you bring a rotation of 3 solid freshmen in every year and then 3 high potential transfer portal guys, and then add some depth to go for 4 remaining spots on a 10 roster, I'm good with that. That's a good team. That's a good team to me. Add some 3-and-D guys, like add some depth, add some guys that you don't mind putting out there to supplement minutes. That would be my goal for roster building.
Yeah, another caveat to think about this, part of what Cal was talking about on this, he said he wants to use those other roster spots for, players or people such as walk-ons and those that rely on non-scholarship players and graduate assistants. That, you see this more often. They use those players to be their scout team essentially and prep for upcoming matchups. He noted that in women's college basketball, teams often use those non-staffers to help them practice. And so Cal was, he said, I want those graduate assistants that have played in Europe or just finished their playing career and can still play. He said we can use them in practice. He said the women's programs have 5 guys they call managers, but who scrimmage against them. He said maybe I do it that way. We have some walk-ons, we have some grad assistants, we have 8 or 9 guys, and that's it. He said if there's a 10th guy, he knows he's the 10th guy. So that's another thing to look at, is he's wanting to bring in these non-staffers, or essentially still athletes that can come and basically scrimmage against your squad to help prep for games. And that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world, but it's like we said, Calipari did say his staff cautioned him to what we just talked about, that one injury could create challenges if you do have a shortened roster. But he said he's comfortable with that concept because he has played small rotations in the past. And he was talking about how he coached 6 players when he was at UMass. So it's harder to get any shorter than that. And, to have the idea that he has these other quote unquote roster spots for these non-staffers or these grad assistants or / walk-ons that can come assist in kind of that game prep, scrimmaging, scouting type role is an interesting thought.
It's certainly interesting. Like I said, it's not a bad idea. I mean, I'm not, I won't say that. What I'll say is that seems pretty inventive. It's a different direction to take things, certainly, because you can develop that way too. You obviously can't have your student manager by NCAA rule later becoming a player. There's restrictions against that, but you can develop some of these guys who do you need for depth and be good defensive players because they're going against high profile talent in practice every night. And if they're getting better, then that's how you develop your depth that way. And maybe those guys stick around long-term or set up that way. So there's all sorts of different thoughts out there. I'm not opposed to looking at college basketball and doing creative ideas. If anything, that's one of the more optimistic things I've heard from John Calipari in the last couple of seasons, is because this is thinking of things in a new direction. And that's always interesting. Sometimes you'll fall on your face when people try new things, and sometimes it'll work out great. I'll be interested to see how this progresses going forward, but this is certainly the effects of the modern era until things change, like you were talking about, Seth, somewhere in the NCAA structure. But yeah, I'm excited to see what comes from it, because like I said, my biggest concern, injuries and youth. Injuries and youth just scare the crud out of me as a college basketball fan.
Yeah, so it's an interesting take from Cal there, and kind of gives us an idea of what you may look for. So, he could be done, close to being done with this roster. You know, you get 1 to 2, maybe 3 more guys. Like he said, that 10th guy knows he's going to be the 10th guy. So you bring in, just hypothetically say you get a commitment from DJ Wagner this weekend. That leaves you with one more spot that you're filling out that will be a key contributor. And then if you add a 10th guy, there's your depth right there in case you do have injury issues. And that's not to say it can't be quality depth, but it's probably not going to be as high of a profile guy as you would think, that he's not going to come just to be the 10th guy. And so it's going to be an interesting situation to see if that's the direction this is trending. And, we heard it straight from Cal there. So that's what we could probably be looking at for this upcoming season for Arkansas.
Well, there's also another player that we're not talking about right now whose name's starting to get thrown around in the portal for the Razorbacks as well. And he's one of the biggest names in the portal also, and that's Coleman Hawkins. So that would be your additional piece in the front court, and then DJ Wagner in the back court. And then ta-da, you have a roster. It's probably the way that John Calipari is looking at it, unless he's got a 10th guy in mind. So like, if that's the plan, we'll see what happens here with that in the next little bit. I don't know if Coleman Hawkins is going to Arkansas by any means, but I've heard that name being thrown out around with Arkansas in the mix for that. So we'll see how that shapes out the next 24 to 48 hours if that stays true. But yeah, no, we're close to having a dang roster at this point. And Arkansas, we can just start analyzing all of this and start trying to figure out what kind of offense Calipari is going to run next year, and try to figure out what things are going to kind of look like.
I was about to say, so yeah, we're getting close to that point where you get that roster finalized. And as we know, these guys start heading to campus, late, middle of June, and they start practicing already. So it'll be interesting to see, once this roster's filled out, what kind of snippets or, what we find out from how practice is going, how these guys mesh together. It's like we've talked about with Musselman rosters before. These are going to be all new guys. So a lot of it's going to depend on how can Cal get these guys to mesh together. But, with the success he's had with the rosters he's had you got a ton of freshmen that come in and they don't, I'm not going to say not knowing each other. They probably know of each other across the AAU circuit, but guys that come in and haven't played together a lot, and he's had the success he has a way that he gets guys to, figure out the way to play with each other. And I think that's going to be the fun thing that we get to see in this first season under your Arkansas Razorback coach, John Calipari.
It's going to be fun. It's certainly going to be fun.
And as we get ready to move on here, Arkansas softball, it's that game in the SEC tournament. It was supposed to be on earlier today. They had some weather issues down in Auburn, Alabama, where the SEC softball tournament is being held, and that game is just now getting started. They are taking on Missouri, and they are currently in the bottom of the first. You have Morgan Leanstock in the circle for Arkansas. It is currently 1-0. This is a Missouri team that we faced before, had here at Bogle. We took care of business and won the series there. So we'll keep an eye on that as we go. But the big thing to talk about this week, we are going to preview this Arkansas versus Mississippi State matchup. As you know, Arkansas fell on the road last weekend versus Kentucky, where it just seemed it was a story of we got the bats hot for one game and then they disappeared for the rest of the series.
I'm going to get out to give the most important analysis you've ever heard on this Arkansas-Mississippi State series. I know I'm a basketball guy, but I'm just going to drop every ounce of my knowledge on why I think the Arkansas Razorbacks are going to win on Saturday, May 11th against Mississippi State. I won't call the other two games, but I've got one game that I'm pretty confident they're going to win. And it's not any reason for one player is going to go off that game or anything like that, or we're going to have some insane pitching performance. It's because they're serving a very, very large amount of beer for Brew Pig Suey, and we're going to have some rowdy fans in the stands on Saturday, paying their $40 for basically unlimited beer at the beer garden that the Razorbacks are hosting on Saturday. So there's my analysis: is we're going to have some great fans in the stands on Saturday. Hog Pen will be going wild.
Fantastic.
There's supposed to be like 10 or 12 different breweries there that day.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
And so that's going to be interesting to see that, we always know the Hog Pen is super rowdy to begin with. And then, like David said, you throw in that $40 and you get your glass that, it's going to be an interesting game. It's going to be great weather this weekend. I don't think you could ask for almost better baseball weather.
Last home series of the last regular season home series of the season. It's perfect time to be out there. Perfect time to be out there.
It's going to be packed, man, especially now that Mississippi State's kind of back in the rankings. Earlier in the year, it didn't look like this series might mean as much as it does now, but this series has a lot of implications, so I think there's going to be a significant fan turnout.
Yeah. And so, like we were talking about, Arkansas lost their series last weekend. You have Mississippi State coming in at number 15, 32-16 on the season, 14-10 in conference play. Arkansas is currently sitting one game ahead of number 2 Texas A&M in the West standings, and they will face the Aggies next weekend on the road to round out the regular season. But like we said, the Hogs are coming off their second series loss of the season, with that previous one being Alabama. But when you look at Mississippi State, they're coming in at 10-2 in their last 12 games, won back-to-back SEC series against Vanderbilt and Alabama. So they're a team that's getting hot at the right time. And this is an Arkansas team that needs to shake off this loss, the series loss, and get back to it. And one thing to note, Dave Van Horn did mention, these guys seem to be almost a little burnout. Plus, you had finals weekend, everything going this week. So he told them at the beginning of this week, Monday and Tuesday, no guys are allowed in the facilities unless you're a pitcher that has to throw a bullpen and has to stay on schedule. Other than that, he said these guys are told to stay away from the facility, kind of reset. And that's something that, might be needed after, it's been a long season that Arkansas's had a lot of success in, but you see, this past series, you go in and you have a loss, you struggle with the bats. Maybe that's where, Dave's on to something where he's like, all right, guys, we need to just relax, kind of get back to, what we are known to be doing.
Yeah, you got to figure out a way to wake up the bats. I think that's everyone's chief complaint. I don't have any problems with the pitching. But yeah, you can get in your head as a hitter sometimes. And I mean, it's just true in any level of sports psychology too, is sometimes you just need to take two steps back because you're just doing too much. That may simply be the case here. That's my big thing, is that Arkansas has just severely needed the bats to wake up. And I believe this team's hitting 300 at Baum and then 200 on the road, or something like that, or something close to it. There's a lot of, that's what a lot of teams look like though too, is that there's these wide gaps. Alabama's a great hitting team, but they don't hit well on the road either. So Arkansas's just got to wake these bats up just a little bit. As a Razorback baseball fan, I would certainly like to see them hitting the ball just a little bit better. Help Hagen Smith out, help your Saturday starter out, help Tigert out, anything that you can do. Just to get these bats woken up would be just my number one thing. Please just wake the bats up.
So I can't speak for SEC baseball, but I always felt like I hit the ball better in like my men's league softball games if I had about 3 or 4 beers before the game. But
Saturday,
I'm teasing. Get some beers down in the dugouts for them guys. Let them shake it off.
I splat bunted a ball one time in my softball league. It's like I had 2 or 3 beers. It's like, I bet no one's ready to run right now. Just ran with it.
It's all part of the strategy. But I am curious to see if we shake up the lineup a little bit. I've heard some more arguments just from some other talking heads around playing Wilmsmeyer a little bit more, even though his bat isn't quite as good as some of the others. You look at some of the guys that's been kind of getting rolled out there to replace Wilmsmeyer to maybe try to provide some more offense. Outside of Peyton Holt, your other guys haven't done any better. Your Ross Lovich's, your Jason Jones's, Will, oh golly, can't remember his last name. Edmondson. Yeah, there you go. Thank you. They're 3 guys that have been kind of subbing in for Wilmsmeyer, if you will, just to try to provide a little bit more of a spark on offense. And you haven't really gotten it from any of them. So in my mind, you throw Wilmsmeyer back out there for the defensive side of things, let him try to, work out his slump at the plate. Because he can hit a little better than he has for us just off of his statistics from Missouri last season. And if you had him out in left field last week, you might not have dropped that one game against Kentucky where there was a pretty critical error made in left field by Ross Lovich. So you can sit there and what if yourself to death. But I'm curious to see if we start kind of making that shift back to, okay, we've tried, kind of playing our hand at trying to swap some offense for defense here. Maybe we kind of revert back to what was the original lineup and just try to stick with it for this last 2-3 true weekends of SEC baseball with the SEC tournament as well. I'm counting that too. And try to let your, have 9 or 10 guys really get into a groove, because you're going to need a little bit more consistency, I think, in your rotation of lineup, if you will, to make a deep run through regionals, super regionals. And then obviously if we make it to Omaha, have a deep run at Omaha. I don't think you're going to be playing 13, 14, 15 guys with 2 or 3 different starters at different positions throughout each weekend. That's, to me, I think we've got to hit a point where we're done with that and go with some guys and stick with them, if you will.
Yeah, I can agree with all of that. But, again, I'm working with a little bit of belief in voodoo here. No one wants the number 1 seed. No one wants to touch that. That's evil, and no one wants it. Maybe
where we're at right now is fine. We just need to probably beat Mississippi State, and then we can lose A&M. We don't care.
Say, that's the number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. That's exactly what you want.
Cursed.
And that's the thing that, even David mentioned that, he's talking about how he wants to get back to where he has a roster, like, Seth was saying, that's not going to be rotating. You want to have the same starters. And he said that they're getting a little bit back to it with these last few series where you're not having midweek games. And so it's going to be the same guys. One thing to touch on that, it was said today was Kendall Diggs is a guy that might be questionable for this week. He irritated that shoulder last week off of a, attempt to catch a deep fly ball. And, Dave was talking about how he told Kendall, he said, you got to be honest with me. If you can't really swing the bat, then, we need to sit you. And if he's one of those guys that you kind of saw him get out of his slump, if you will, last weekend. And he's a guy that if he can be like that, maybe you got to have him healthy for a postseason run. And maybe that's where you like we said, we want to have some of that same continuity with a roster, but at the same time, you don't want to risk further injury of a guy that could be a key piece down the road. But like you said, it's going to be interesting once you take a look at this Mississippi State team. One thing to look at, it's going to be a pitching matchup that Seth, you talked about that we haven't really seen all season, but you're probably going to get it here, is that ace on ace matchup. Most Friday night games in the SEC this season so far, you've seen Arkansas throw Hagen Smith, and then you see the opposing team just throw somebody else, not their ace. They don't want to worry about trying to, have to use up maybe a guy that could get them a win another game in the series. Well, it's been announced that taking the mound Friday night for Mississippi State is Kyle Stevens, Mississippi State's ace. He's 7-3 on the season with a 2.96 ERA. This is statistically one of the best pitching staffs Arkansas will face all season. They have a 4.68 team ERA in conference play, which is second in the SEC, only behind yours truly, the Arkansas Razorbacks. And so he's a guy that it'll be interesting to see him and Hagen Smith dueling it out, going head to head. Hagen comes in with a 9-0 record with a 1.36 ERA on the season. So this could be one of the best pitching matchups that you see all season long.
Yeah, I think game 1 is going to be another one of those that we've talked about it in the past. We've won too many 2-1 type games. I'm scared this will be another one that's similar to that. Who can squeak out that extra run, whether it's due to a wild pitch or something crazy. All those very small minor mistakes are going to be critical in a game that the pitchers, stack up this closely to each other. Crazy things could happen. Who knows? You could knock somebody out of the game a little bit earlier than expected, but I do expect this one to be a pretty tight, 4 runs or under per team type game, where every error, every small misplayed ball, every double play that's close but you don't make it can end up costing you dearly. So it's going to be a tightly contested one, I think. Games 2 and 3, it seems like have been a toss-up for whoever we play against. So we'll see.
It's going to be a great atmosphere on Saturday.
Yeah,
dang right.
And speaking of Saturday, the guy taking the mound for the Mississippi State Bulldog, Jurangelo Sajentije, he is 7-1 on the season, 353, but he is the guy that, if you remember a few years ago, it was advertised or hyped up. He is the ambidextrous pitcher that can turn around and throw it left-handed or right-handed and has a
he can throw 90 plus either way.
Yeah, and he has a nifty little glove that is a ambidextrous glove that he can just turn around and throw it on the other hand. He'll get the start on your Saturday game, and it's going to be interesting because you're going to see him going up against Brady Tigert, who, both him and Molina got knocked out of their respective games early last weekend, and you've got to have better games out of those guys this weekend, especially with, we're coming right down to the end here. Last home series, you don't want to lose 2 series in a row. You need to jump back before having a monumental matchup with A&M next weekend. And then for the Sunday guy, for Mississippi State, most likely going to be Brooks Auger. He's 1-2 on the season with a 4.13 ERA. They have other arms that you could look at Tyler Davis, 4-0 with a 1.33, and Tyson Harden, 3-0, 2.19 out of the bullpen as well. So, that might be one of those type of games on Sunday where you have maybe the starter that goes a few innings and then you work your bullpen. It's going to be interesting to see the approach for both teams. Like we said, with Molina and Tiger both not having great outings last week, and you want to see those guys bounce back in a big way, in a much-needed way. And thinking about going up against this Mississippi State offense, players you want to look at for them, Dakota Jordan, he has been the main guy for the Mississippi State lineup. 16 home runs, 56 RBIs with an OPS of 1.673. He has slowed down a little bit after his hot start to the season. He just has 2 home runs since the beginning of April, and his batting average has dropped nearly 30 points since then. So a guy that started off the season hot, but one thing about that, you don't want to give this guy a chance to get it back going again. And that's why I think your pitching is going to be crucial. Other than you get your one game of Hagen Smith that, most likely you know what to expect. It's about 6 innings, probably anywhere 10 to 12 strikeouts, maybe a walk or 2. And that's what you're going to get. But when you go and throw your Saturday, Sunday game, at this point, that's really up in the air.
Yeah, you got to watch out for guys like him. A couple other names, Connor Huge Sack, however you pronounce it, Hunter Hines, David Mershon. They've kind of got like a big 4, big 5 type lineup where they're the front end of their lineup can really do a lot of damage, and that's what we've seen some of these past weekends. That's really propelled them into the top 15 after a really sluggish start outside of Dakota Jordan. The earlier part of the season for them just wasn't phenomenal. But they've had the rest of their team kind of kick things into gear as of late, and that's why they've been able to knock off some really good ball clubs such as Alabama, Vanderbilt, a few others to kind of get where they are. And so this is not the best time to be playing them, if you will, especially considering, earlier on in the year, I was looking at this series as, okay, maybe we'll have a pretty good win right there before we go play Texas A&M, but it's going to be tough sledding for both teams, honestly, especially considering Mississippi State's got to play on the road, but they've been hot as of late, and we've kind of been the opposite of hot. So we've got to kick things up a notch, I think, to keep up with the level of competition that these guys have, especially in that Saturday game. There's going to be it's going to be a slugfest on who can get into the other team's bullpen the quickest. I think that's really going to be where the games are won in those second and third games.
Well, I would say that I would think that Baum is good for 1, and then Hagen Smith is good for 1. So
2 out of 3. Let's go.
I would say that's 2 games. I would expect Arkansas to win the series this weekend. That would be my expectation. I would say that would probably go 2-1. Is how the series shakes out. Whether you lose the Sunday game or the Saturday game, I'll let you know. But that's my guess, is that Arkansas wins 2 out of 3 on this weekend.
I think that's probably definitely feasible.
Yeah, and I think this is a series that you definitely want to win, especially if you want to talk about. I don't know how the math or the odds, or what the situation would be and what it would have to shake out to, but Arkansas is still squarely up there, in a potential contention for SEC regular season or part of a regular season title. As we know, Kentucky's in the East, so all it takes is Kentucky losing as a series this weekend, and they drop right back down to almost even playing field with Arkansas and A&M, as where they're all within 1 game of each other. You also got to throw Tennessee in there, as they've gotten hot late into the season here. I think you're coming down to all these last 2 series are going to be crucial matchups. And, like you said, most likely it's a 2-1 win this weekend with a series. You'd love it extremely if Arkansas could pull out another sweep at bomb like we know they've done all season with the exception of Florida. And so, I like your guys' thoughts there. I think Arkansas does win the series 2-1, depending on matchups. Maybe they get sweep, maybe they don't, but I think this is going to be crucial to get back into form before you have to go on the road and take up probably what is your biggest road matchup of the season that could have big SEC, not only regular season title contentions on the line, potential seeding, moving, whether you move up and down in seeding as well.
Well, what are we sitting right now? Like the number 3 or number 2 seed overall? Like that is
number 2.
Yeah, that's not a horrible place to be right now. So I think more importantly than anything else, you want to maintain where you are and making sure that you take 2 out of 3 in each of these next 2 series against Texas A&M and Mississippi State this weekend, and then just be respectable during the SEC tournament, and maybe don't play. If you can get out of playing in some of those thunderstorm games in Hoover, that might be one. Maybe that might be nice as well.
That's awfully true right there. I honestly, we talked about this before too, even before the Kentucky series. If we lost the Kentucky series, which we did, win the Mississippi State series, but then also turn around and lose the Texas A&M series, as long as you don't get swept in any of them, I think you still maintain a top 8 seed and you still host your regional and supers. And at that point, who cares? I mean, it really doesn't matter. So as long as you do enough of the business that you need to, especially with winning this Mississippi State series, I think that is critical. You can't lose all 3. I think that could knock you down to that number 10, number 11, number 12 position or something like that, and that would be a little bit rough. So got to take care of business while you have the opportunity to at home, to give yourself a little bit of slack, if you will, whenever you do go on the road and play probably your toughest opponent of the year.
Absolutely. And that would be my goal, is just I would like to just make sure that you're staying in Baum Walker all the way to Omaha. That would be the goal. That would be the ideal goal for the Razorbacks.
Yep. I was about to say, according to Baseball America right now, Arkansas is in one of those top 8 national seed spots where they have the projected, this is all projections right now of our regional, your number 2 in the Fayetteville regional being one Oklahoma State Cowboys team, followed up by Louisiana Tech and Arkansas Little Rock, UALR, which could turn into an interesting regional. But as we know,
all of that. I hate every team that you said in there. No, absolutely. Little Rock's fine, but I know Louisiana Tech's normally good, and Oklahoma State we've had some late night games with. No, I'm not about this, Caleb.
And so that's where you're sitting. Arkansas, most likely, barring any giant meltdown, is going to be one of those top 8 national seeds, meaning you win, you keep playing at home, just like David said, in Baum Walker until it's time to head to Omaha. So as we close out here, I think this is going to be a big weekend for Arkansas to bounce back, maybe get back to the basics and start hitting the ball well. They've been hitting 194 in SEC play, which is not great at all. You would like to see mid 200s, close to 300 batting average, especially in conference play. But, maybe some of these guys had a chance to get back, be away from the facility, kind of reset, and are ready to go and fired up and locked in for this weekend. And so, go ahead.
So I was just saying, I got my fingers crossed for him because it's coming down to crunch time where you don't have as many weekends to kind of get back going, if you will. So it's getting close to that do or die time.
That is very true. So as we wrap up here.
Oh, sorry. I was going to make one more wisecrack. I was just going to say,
go for it, David.
I was just going to hold a picture of Jonah Hill up in the stands that says he gets on base. Just encouragement all Saturday. That's my goal. Is I'm just going to see if I can't motivate the guys to get on. He gets on base. That's Moneyball.
Moneyball, baby. Yep.
He gets on base.
Very true. And before we get out of here, don't forget, we talked about it on all of our shows. May 18th, Core Brewing. Be there. Our next live show. It's going to be fantastic. We're going to be talking about Arkansas baseball. It'll be just after that last game of the Texas A&M series. So we'll be breaking down that series, talking about what does the projections look like for postseason play as we're going to the SEC tournament, what that looks like. And we're going to have a special guest with us. Not going to reveal that just yet, but it's going to be a good time. Get out there. And if you didn't get out there last time, get out there and join us. It's a fun time, great drinks, great atmosphere. Get a chance to come out, listen to the show, and listen to some Arkansas Razorback sports talk. And as we wrap up, don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast on YouTube and Apple Podcasts and Spotify, anywhere you find your podcast. Audio is going to be Apple Podcast, Spotify. You can find all of our content here on YouTube with a video format. Thank you for listening to today's episode of formerly Woo Pig Weekly. Hogs on the Hill now. Still getting used to that change. But we'll catch you back here on Sunday or Monday for our Razor recap show, recapping this weekend's baseball series versus Mississippi State and the results of the SEC softball tournament and how the Lady Razorbacks do.